All right, everybody. Welcome back to Friday Live. I'm Jack Forster, Hodinkee's editor-in-chief, and I'm here today with Mr. Louis Westphalen, who's our vintage watch expert.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, we're back after a little bit of a hiatus. We were gone for a couple of weeks. 4th of July weekend was one reason, and also we had a lot of folks who were on the road. France, England, kind of all over the place for the last couple of weeks. But we're back with Friday Live. And I thought we'd just jump right into it. There's been a lot of stuff going on in the auction world, interesting stuff going on over the last couple of months, certainly. But there's also some stuff to look forward to. And interestingly enough, there's a big auction coming up in Monaco, or several auctions coming up, I think, right? In Monaco, and Louis got some picks for us.
Yes.
Some stuff that he thinks is interesting, unusual, fun, and different.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, Monaco is kind of like an unlikely place for so many auctions to take place, just because it's the second smallest country in the world. Vatican is first, and you have 4 auctions coming up in less than 2 weeks. We've looked at the different auction houses. There is Antiquorum, the European side of Antiquorum, which is different than the US one. There is Arcurial, it's a French-based auction house, and there is Bull. There is a last one, but we've decided to focus on those 3. And for each, I've kind of picked the ones that really inspired me.
Oh, sounds great. So tell us what you've come up with.
Definitely. So for the first one, for Antiquorum, the website, by the way, is antiquorum.swiss. It always gets me confused, but that's how to get to the catalog.
Oh yes, that extension was actually enabled not that long ago.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
The .swiss. Yep.
And the antiquorum.com is another branch of the auction house. So for the first one, it's 2 diving watches with amazing provenance each. So the first one, it's a Sea Dweller 1665, with something a bit different on the dial, Comex. Those are extremely rare. They were, dive watches, tool watches, really employed by really very experienced divers who are diving as far as a man can go, basically.
Yeah, deep professional saturation diving.
Exactly.
Basically, yeah.
And what's pretty cool with this one, it's a rare watch to begin with, but this one, they call it the extreme full set on the catalog, just because it comes with a lot of things. Box and papers, that's what we call a full set. There is also something cool, I think we had one in the office at some point, the orange diving suit.
We did. Stuck in a closet someplace.
Okay, we'll find it someday. And also the diving log of the diver. So you can see, how much the watch was used.
Oh, his diving log. Oh,
yeah.
That's great. Wow, that's a wonderful piece of...
So you've got everything, basically.
Yeah. Everything except the diver.
Exactly. The estimate is fairly high, as you can imagine. It's above 100,000 euros, so $120,000 around. Wow. And it's a rare watch, but finding one with that much around it is fairly exceptional.
Wow.
The second one, we're going to stay within the kind of French things. Comex was a compagnie d'exploration. Then we are heading more into a military setting with the Marine Nationale. How do you say that in English? Navy?
Yeah.
The French Navy.
French Navy.
And basically, the French Navy was a big client, not of Rolex, but of Tudor. Those watches were a bit cheaper, and we were already trying to save money where we could. And so for those, they ordered a lot of Submariner, the Tudor Submariner, a lot of them in blue. And you have one of those coming up. The difference with like a regular Submariner, you don't actually have a bracelet on it, fixed lugs. And the second is the case back. The case back, you have MN, Marine Nationale, plus the year that it was assigned for the first time. What's complex with Marine Nationale is that you can imagine that the price is very different than a regular Tudor Submariner. So the case back is... people try to counterfeit the engraving on the case back. So you want to make
there's
sure...
There's money, there's motivation, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. So you want to make sure that the MN that you see is real. There is a couple of stylistic checkpoints that you can have, but honestly the best is what this watch has, which is a presence in the log of one of the watchmakers from the army. And the reason for that is basically, they were tracking when the watches needed to go to service and what happened to them.
Right.
And sometimes even they would say the watch is beyond irrecuperable. I'll just throw it away,
Right.
And so you want to make sure that there is a history behind that, and there is that. And so with this watch, you know where it was, what it went through, and where it was allocated.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like secure to know that.
So that's an important point. If you're looking to collect a Tudor Marine Nationale, the ideal circumstances, it's actually in a watchmaker's logbook, and there's a record of the serial
Yes.
number, record of the watch.
Not all of them have that because we don't have all the logs from the watchmakers. We have the ones from the south of France who closed shop and sold it at some
That's
point.
interesting.
But then there is another paper, which is a decommissioned paper. But those ones are also often faked.
Yes.
So I wouldn't say that's like the ultimate proof. But I think when you have that, you have an amazing set of a mythical tool watch.
Yeah, and you do have to be so careful out there these days with such high dollar figures associated with so many mass-produced watches.
Definitely.
And with so many things that would kind of indicate that the watch is authentic, with some of these things at least being relatively easy to fake, and with there being such a high reward financially for faking, it's become a fairly serious problem. Would
Definitely,
you say?
yeah. The estimate is starts at like 15,000 euros. I think it's going to go much above, but that's probably how the auction house compels you to start.
Right.
So that's it for Antiquarium. Arcurial, two watches, very different. The first one is the Nautilus Jumbo, the 3700, the first one that was released in 1976. Iconic design, Gerargenta, the guy who did the Royal Oak before. So I mean, the watch is amazing to begin with. It has a lot of presence on the wrist. But I think what makes this one special, although there is no engraving, it says on the description that it comes from the collection of the sculptor Armand.
Oh yes.
And it's not the single watch, the only watch to come from that collection.
The sculptor Armand. Is there an association between him and Cartier?
That I'm not sure, but what I know is that he's French, but he spent a lot of time in the US. He actually died in the US, in New York, and he did a couple of compression sculptures about watches.
That's
so maybe
right. That's right.
That's what they got.
Yeah. Crushed some watches together.
Exactly.
in a metal cube, I think was. Which is a little heartbreaking if you're a watch lover. But
I think he used a lot of swatches and stuff, and fake potentially. So I don't think he used his watches. And it's not the only watch that he has at this auction. He also has a Piaget Beta 21, where you have the engravings because it was given for his birthday by Yves Piaget, who at the time was the CEO of Piaget.
Cool. Very cool. Louis, something it just occurred to me that I wanted to ask you. Somewhat famously, the Royal Oak was prototyped in gold before being made in steel, and I was just wondering, have you ever heard anything like that about the
Nautilus?
About the Nautilus? Yeah.
No, not really. Maybe because they were a bit more sure of the potential.
Right.
The fact that the Royal Oak had come first. Maybe they did it because in the end, it's much easier to work on gold. It's softer than steel.
So they might have internally prototyped it in white gold or some of the components, but
it didn't come out at least.
Right.
So that's the first lot, a great watch with a great provenance. The second is a Rolex, but not the Rolex you would expect. It's the reference 6062. It's a gorgeous Rolex, very elegant. I think Cara wrote a long love letter to that watch. The one that she wrote about, if I'm not mistaken, was in steel. This one is in yellow gold, but I find it even more charming because it's closer to what people were wearing at the time. And this one looks to be in great condition. It has what they call the stellene dial, when you see those little stars as indexes that make them even more valuable. And there is an engraving on the back. Some people like it, some people don't, but at least you can kind of like trace the watch.
Right.
It says that it's coming from an important European collection, so
Now, in your experience, there isn't really a strict rule of thumb that you can always apply about engravings on the back of a watch. It may not matter. It may hurt a little bit. It may help a lot, depending on what the engraving says.
Yeah, I guess if it proves historical context, then definitely it increases the value. Sure. Then I would say it depends. It really depends on the watch. Like, on, let's say, a reverso, people like to put their own initials. So if you have the initials of someone else, maybe that's not that great.
On the other hand, it's kind of hard to imagine, the Jaeger-lecoultre tank. It's impossible to imagine that watch without the charming engraving on the back. Yeah.
That's what makes the difference between the regular tank and this one, which is more than $300,000 at auctions. And so I think there is no rules, but what I know is that it's more like about personal preferences.
Right.
And to me, it really does not really matter. But I've heard like other things where it's just like they want the case back to be completely intact. Mm-hmm. The last two picks are from another auction house, Bull, and not wristwatches actually. Those are two clocks. I know that you love them.
Oh yes. Yeah. These are amazing ones, I have to say.
The first one is an Atto, and it's kind of like a forgotten brand that was doing incredible clocks, including some on fish bowls, which is an interesting concept. And this one is it's an electronic clock from the 1930s, and it's quite amazing to think about an electronic clock at that time period. And even more amazing when you look at the clock that they don't hide that. It's kind of like the pride of the watch. It's in the center and it's really visible. And it's beautifully made. The base is in marble. Like it's stunning.
A real showpiece.
Yeah. To me, it's like something you really see rarely at auctions. The estimate is around 10,000 euros, so it definitely comes with a price tag. And the last one of the selection is again something you don't see often. It's an illuminating world globe from GLC. And it's exactly what it says. You see the world map. That said, at the bottom, at the base, you have an 8-day clock. And thinking about both combined is quite amazing. And thinking again that this one is dated in 1935.
And
that's
the lines
impressive.
on the map have been redrawn quite a bit since then.
Yeah. So I think that would be a really cool object to have. It kind of like reminds me of my childhood, but in a much better version. And the estimate is between 2,000 to 3,000 euros. So
it's funny too, because once you get outside the realm of the obvious high-value wristwatches, the collectible Tudors, the collectible Rolexes, collectible pa-TEK Philippe, there's actually an opportunity to get some really beautiful, beautiful decorative objects out there for not very much money.
Yeah, I totally agree.
At a $2,000 to $3,000 estimate, if you're just looking for something gorgeous, connected with a great name, that's a beautiful thing to have around, this seems like a bargain.
Yeah, I would say the one caveat is that you're not wearing that on your wrist.
Yeah.
So it's more like your personal pleasure at home rather than let's say a Rolex that you can wear every day.
You can't take it out and show it to your friends.
No.
I mean, you can try, but it's probably a terrible idea.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, those are great picks. Thank you so much for rounding those up for us. Again, a somewhat unusual venue for auctions, I guess. Monaco is, we usually hear Geneva, London.
It's becoming bigger. Yeah. There is one reason I've heard is kind of like fiscal, because like France and Paris used to be a big place, but they ask any auction house to disclose the names and the addresses of the winning participants.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then the fiscal authorities get those and can investigate. Yeah. Whereas in Monaco, you have a bit less of disclosure. So the top lots were not doing that well in France, and so that's why you see like this transition moving to Monaco, and also like in honesty, like Monaco during the summer, it's quite nice. So you can imagine that a lot of wealthy people are going to be nearby, and would love to spend half a day in an auction house.
That's quite interesting that discretion is still something that attracts people to an auction.
Yes.
I guess it's not that surprising.
Yeah, and it has been a big theme with Monaco in general. Yeah. So that explains the success.
Great. Yeah, well, amazing choices. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is we have some really cool watches here in the office that we're working with, some for a week on the wrist, some for other stories, and a couple that I thought you guys would enjoy seeing are, first of all, we have one of the new Grand Seikos. This is a Grand Seiko spring drive with the so-called Snowflake dial, and it's sort of a perennial fan favorite.
Yeah.
People just love the Snowflake. It's really, really unusual, and it's kind of a visual effect that you don't get from dials from pretty much any other brand. Such a great value as well. Of course, one of the things that Grand Seiko is notorious for is offering just fantastic value for the money. And here we have a full titanium case, titanium bracelet, so super easy to wear. A little on the larger side for a Grand Seiko, I think at 41 or 42 millimeters. But you have the spring drive movement, of course, and spring drive is something that some people struggle with a little bit conceptually. It's basically a mechanical watch all the way through until you get to where the escapement would be, and then instead of the escapement, you have what's called a glide wheel, and the glide wheel is controlled by a little magnet, and that's how you get that kind of smoothly gliding seconds hand. Which is just, it's sort of the signature of spring drive, and it's something that you don't really see anywhere else. You get the only thing that I've seen that gets close to it is some very high frequency quartz movements. You get what looks like a smoothly moving hand, but this sort of gliding motion is really attractive.
And I want to add to that like you also see the new layout from the Grand Seiko collection with this model. Because this Snowflake existed for a long time ago under reference SBGA 011. I really like it. And now they kind of like they have
With a
kept
gun to
they've
my
kept
head,
it.
I could not have pulled that
Really?
reference number. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
So now they've really kept it as it was, except that they've risen Grand Seiko, and the Seiko mention has disappeared, which allows the brand to differentiate itself better from Seiko, because you had two different price points and like finishing, and it's something that Grand Seiko was struggling.
And it's something that the Seiko community seems to be split a little bit. Some people miss the Seiko logo on the dial. They think it provided a little bit more balance. And but many people over the years have said, "Oh, I would buy a Grand Seiko if only it didn't say Seiko on the dial."
Yeah.
And, their wishes have been granted, and everybody else still gets a fantastic watch. So.
That's fair.
The other piece that I have in that I'm working with, which I think is interesting for a number of reasons, is a Tudor Black Bay chronograph. And this is another watch that has it's attracted a lot of comment and a lot of interest for several reasons. And of course, one of the reasons, several reasons. One of them is the riveted bracelet, which is sort of a shout out to vintage Tudor bracelets, of course. The other is chronograph snowflake hands. The snowflake hand is a little bit bigger than you usually see in other chronographs, and when it crosses the 30 minutes register, it does block a little bit more of the register than would ordinarily be the case with a thinner chronograph hand. You look at a Speedmaster, for instance, relatively narrow hand, so read off of elapsed time is not a huge problem. And the third thing that is, I think, really interesting about this watch, of course, is what's inside. Is the movement. So this is the Tudor caliber MT5813, which is actually based on the Breitling B01. I mean, it essentially is the Breitling, B01 movement. So what that is a automatic, vertical clutch, column wheel controlled chronograph movement, and this is actually a very, very affordable watch. Priced just over $5,000, so it's quite a lot of bang for the buck, and I guess it really comes down to whether or not you struggle with the snowflake hands.
Yeah,
on a
I think so, because the price point is amazing. It's as far as I know, it's even better than the Breitling that do use this B01.
Yeah, it might be.
When I've visited a couple of manufacturers, and when you're talking with watchmaker about what makes a modern movement, especially in terms of chronograph, the B01 is often named not at Breitling, at other places, as an excellent chronograph movement because it's very reliable and also very easy to service. It's bigger.
I've heard the same things about it, that it's very watchmaker friendly. It's very sort of rationally designed. Yeah.
And so it's great to see Tudor embrace that, and I think it proves the point, because behind Tudor you have Rolex, and they don't change things easily. So when they do, there is a good reason
very
behind
slowly, very slowly. But but usually the change is motivated by something rational.
Yeah.
So Now, Lou, you've got a couple of really, really cool watches that I think that you want to tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, so I've been looking at a lot of the Sea Dweller. I mean, you've probably all read and maybe commented on Ben's article.
You want to look at the older one first?
No, the new one.
Okay,
the new
let's
one,
take
I
a look at
think.
the new
The
guy.
new one, Ben just wrote an article about it. The reference is 126600. It starts to get a bit long,
Yep.
but it's the brand new watch. It was, like, honestly, the sensation of Baselworld, in positive and negative. I mean, some people regretted the increase in size, the Cyclops, which made it very different than the rest of the Sea Dweller line.
Yeah, that was the big thing that people kind of commented on. Other than, I mean, there are other sort of incremental changes. It's a little bit bigger in size, but the big thing is the presence of the Cyclops.
Yeah.
People had strong views.
Exactly, but some people did like it. There was also the red line that was welcome and a nod to like the very first Sea Dweller, the prototypes even.
Yep.
And so this watch is big. It's 43 millimeter, but at the same time, it's very wearable. And I was really surprised because I would say most of the watches I wear are vintage, like 35-ish, and suddenly you get a 43 that works really well. And I would say it's mostly thanks to the bracelet. And if you compare the bracelet, the modern bracelet, to the old ones, the changes are incredible. And
got a little ambient New York atmospheric
yes, sorry about
sound
that.
effect going on out there.
But yeah, so this watch was really interesting to review, especially because I was able to gather a couple of vintage around that. One that I'm wearing right now, which is a transitional, is the 666. So it has the matte dial of the old ones, but the sapphire of the technology, the modern technology. And the other one that I wanted to show.
Before we go on, I just wanted to ask you, how did you feel about the Cyclops?
That's a good question. I was uneasy at first, and honestly, it's really practical. And the thing is, I don't feel that this watch, this Sea Dweller, is meant as a Sea Dweller. To me, it's more meant as like a bigger Submariner.
Right.
And the Sea Dweller was supposed to evolve in the deep sea. They kept the deep sea, and then they made this one kind of like a bigger Submariner.
Right.
And so I think the Cyclops is iconic to Rolex. It's practical as well.
Right.
I grew accustomed to it, honestly.
Yeah, as Ben mentioned in as Ben mentioned in the story, and as several readers have commented, a date is actually kind of a useful thing for somebody who's doing saturation diving and spending days in a dry decompression chamber. It's nice to be able to know what the date is.
Yeah.
And certainly the Cyclops makes the date more visible.
Clearly, yeah. And I think it's interesting if you compare it to, we have the Sea Dwellers 1665, which was the very first reference.
Very first reference, which we have. So let's, shall we take a look at that?
Yes, definitely. And you see some of the common roots. One of them is the presence of red. So here you have two lines of red. So that's why it's called the double red Sea Dweller, DRSD. But the prototype of that reference had only one single line of red, and that's what you find in the modern reference. And if you, if you compare the two, it's crazy because one looks like it has eaten the other. It's the size difference, I think, is the
even
size,
more
the
dramatic.
thickness. But at the same time, if I were to dive really deep, I don't think I would trust this one anymore.
Not anymore.
And the value of this one is so crazy.
Water resistance on the Sea Dweller when it first came out was
if I'm not mistaken, 4,000 feet, so 1,220 meters. And then this one doubled. Let me check. No, it was 600 meters, 1,200 meters on this one, and on this one we're going much deeper. No, not even. We're going the same depth. So this one, this reference started in 1978. So basically, they got it since 1978, the 1,000 meters mark. And I think this reference, the first one, really started this line, and it's incredible to see how this watch still looks, so relevant today.
Yeah. Probably do well if it came out.
Yeah.
In addition to the watches, which we'll get to in a little bit, one of the things that perpetually gets talked about is how do you pronounce the names of some of these brands. Now, with Ulysse Nardin, I've actually heard it pronounced Ulysses Nardin, I think, is the most over-the-top mispronunciation I've heard. And you know, I thought probably the best way for us to get a handle on how to pronounce some of these French names is to ask an actual Frenchman who we found. So here we are, Louis. So can you tell us, please, what your thoughts are on how to correctly pronounce? It's not Ulysses Nardin.
It's not,
No.
definitely not.
It's pretty far off the.
Yes, I'll take a very French accent, and it's Ulysse Nardin.
Ulysse Nardin.
So Ulysse Nardin.
Yeah.
So there is no Nardin at the end.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, Ulysse is it's a name.
Yeah.
It's a first
Yeah.
name, and Nardin would be a common last name.
And appropriately for a company that makes marine chronometers, Ulysse is of course Ulysses.
Yes.
Odysseus, the mariner from the Odyssey.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's a fairly easy one, unless unless you insist on saying Ulysses Nardin. But it can get a little tricky even with what seem like simple names. For instance, the next one is often pronounced, at least in the U.S., as Mont Blanc.
Yeah. And it's not.
No.
Basically, you don't pronounce either the T or the C.
Really?
Yeah.
Not the
like
C.
It's exactly like the tall mountain in Europe,
Yeah.
Mont Blanc.
Yeah.
Well, that's it.
That's the one.
So it's Mont Blanc in one word, but
No
without
C whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a silent.
I think I've been pronouncing this. I've been saying Mont Blanc.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
now you know.
Darn it. All right. Next one, number 3, is this one I've heard pronounced Audemars Piaget, I think is the
Okay, well.
the worst mispronunciation. And of course, Piaget is not what that second word is it?
No, definitely not. It's a different brand actually.
Yeah.
It's Audemars Piguet.
Audemars Piguet.
And again, Audemars, you would think you pronounce yes, but you don't.
Right.
That's kind of like the silent letters from France.
You would also think it's 3 syllables,
Yeah.
right? Audemars.
No. Yeah.
But
No. It's not.
it's really 2 syllables.
Yeah. Audemars Piguet.
Audemars Piguet. Yeah.
And it's 2 last names of like 2 well-established families in Switzerland.
Right. Right.
So no reason to cut them in different ways.
Right. All right. Next, we have one. Number 4, we have one that is a little, not necessarily tricky to pronounce, but there's a little controversy over part of it, and people seem to go, 50-50 on whether the first or the second syllable is stressed in the name of this particular company. So, you hear people say pa-TEK Philippe, you hear people say pa-TEK Philippe.
Yeah.
What do you think on this?
None, can I say? I would say...
You're agnostic on the whole.
Yeah. I would say it's more like pa-TEK Philippe. Kind of like more even, because I think French is more even in pronunciation. That said, he was not French, pa-TEK.
Right.
So maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel that at least in French-speaking Switzerland, you would say pa-TEK Philippe.
Yeah. Yeah, something even curiouser I've noticed about that, is sometimes people will say pa-TEK Philippe, but when they're referring to the company just by the first name, they'll say pa-TEK.
Yeah.
So there's an inconsistency even there.
Maybe trying to find rhythm in such a short word.
Yeah.
But I would say pa-TEK.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, then the next one, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is one that I've heard maybe the most arguments about. Even not only in the United States but also in Europe, and I think probably the most kind of interesting, I want to say, mispronunciation of this one that I've ever heard is jaeger-lecoultre.
Okay, well,
which seems kind of out there.
Yeah, no, it's not there. So I would say on this one I would say jaeger-lecoultre, because Edmond Jaeger was established in Paris.
Right.
I think his name was probably like from German origins,
right,
but still the fact that he was developing his activity in Paris, you would pronounce it the French way.
Yeah.
So Jaeger. And as for Lecoultre, I actually heard, and from people from Jaeger-lecoultre, I've heard some of them pronouncing the L before so Lecoultre, and some of them not saying it. So I don't think there is a definite rule in there.
Okay.
I would say in French you would not, but
Right.
You know,
But in Switzerland.
exactly.
Where they're less strict in these matters. I remember actually once Louis, after we'd worked together for a couple of months, telling me that he thought my French, which I have very little of, that I was speaking with a Swiss accent, and I don't think you meant it as a compliment.
I don't remember, but you do have a Swiss accent.
Yeah. Okay, so jaeger-lecoultre.
Jaeger-lecoultre.
The other thing you often hear, of course, is Jaeger.
Yeah, which it is not. It's how you would pronounce it in German, basically.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I actually got yelled at by a French vintage watch dealer many years ago for saying Jaeger.
Okay.
Yeah. I said, "Can I see the Jaeger?" And I got a lecture instead.
That's good.
And this last one is it's not so often dramatically mangled, but there are some nuances to it that can be a little bit tricky. So tell us about Vacheron Constantine.
I think this one is really long, so that makes it harder.
Yeah.
But it's simply Vacheron Constantin.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the US they really struggle with the on of Vacheron, and Constantin is, you know, you stop there with the last un and not an e at the end.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
not Vacheron Constantine.
Not
Constantine
Vacheron
is like Constantin is the name for the guy, and Constantine is the name for the girl. So
Yeah, Constantine is also, of course, it's a comic book character in a supernatural movie, but
Yes.
not a watch brand.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Oh, and we have finally one bonus round, which is a company whose name I occasionally hear pronounced as Lang & Son.
Mm-hmm.
And Louis speaks both French and German, so maybe you could clue us into how you would actually get your mouth around the name of this particular German brand.
Yeah, I would say A Lange und Sonne.
A Lange und Sonne.
The end is und in German, and the D is more pronounced like a T.
Yeah.
And the Sonne is the plural of, it means suns,
Right.
with the umlaut of the German that has this like connotation that you need to keep.
Cool. Well, thank you for watching. Now, there's dozens and dozens more French and German brands that we could have talked about. Yeah, maybe next time. But those I think are some of the most interesting examples of difficult names to get your mouth around. So we have some questions that we're gonna wrap up with, as we always try to do. We have let's see now. Oh, speaking of pronunciation, there's a gentleman or lady. I can't actually tell from the questioner's name, but so here's the question: why do some Hodinkee staff say pa-TEK or I assume Jaeger? Thoughts on the importance of getting the name pronounced correctly? Well, I guess that was what this whole previous segment was about. It's tough. I mean, getting pronunciation exactly correct. What constitutes exactly correct probably varies from one place to another.
Yeah.
And, as you've pointed out, it's different in France than it is in Switzerland. In certain
Yeah,
respects.
definitely. I think it's just like a matter of trying. And it's nice to kind of like understand where the name of a brand that you like come from, and to try to kind of like get close to what it is. But at the same time, if like it's not that dramatic. It's just a name, and like we all know that the watches is what matters. Yeah,
nobody's gonna kick you out of a gathering of watch enthusiasts if you say Vacheron Constantine.
Yes.
Yeah. They might if you say Ulysses Nardin.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting question. Is there a humidity requirement for storing your watch collection? I live in Arizona where you can have single-digit humidity, and I always fear the oils and lubricants will dry out faster than normal. Now, I don't believe that ambient humidity has all that much of an effect on how modern synthetic oils dry out. With the thing that I've always heard about oils is that atmospheric pressure can have an effect on how fast oils evaporate. I mean, they certainly do dry out, but I think the vapor pressure of oils is pretty low, and you would have to go into a pretty low external pressure situation for oils to start to evaporate dramatically faster. Typically, oils in watchmaking are applied in very, very tiny amounts, and they're really held by surface tension in place. So if a watch has been oiled correctly, relative humidity would probably be more of an issue for wearing external components, I think.
Yeah.
Aging of straps, aging of cases. even watches that aren't perfectly sealed, especially
Exactly.
vintage watches.
I was about to say, like,
Yep.
I wouldn't worry about single-digit humidity. I would worry about the opposite effect, like a very high humidity. And you see in those countries that like vintage watches may not age that well,
Right.
just because they are not as waterproof as they were, and then you have a lot of water getting into the case and like
Yeah, and
affecting
water
the
is,
movement.
chemically, water is a solvent. It facilitates chemical reactions.
Yeah.
So, the more moisture that you have, even if it's just high, generally high relative humidity, probably the more aging you're going to see in external components.
Exactly.
But for oils, I wouldn't think
No.
that high humidity versus low humidity would be an issue. All right, I think we have time for one more. Louis, I'm going to kick this one your way because I think this is something that I have some views on this as well, but I think it's something that you know a great deal about and can really speak to. Must the cost of maintenance factor into the choice of purchasing a new or vintage watch?
Yes. Because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think it's also.
But we try not to think about it, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah, but it's like a car.
When we're looking at a beautiful vintage watch, that maybe hasn't been wound in God knows how long, and no representation is made by the seller as to whether or not the watch can be relied on to, can be expected to work reliably, or when we buy a new watch, where the cost of a simple maintenance might be 4 figures for a time-only watch, depending on the brand. We try not to think about it because we're in love.
That's true, but I've heard one thing. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard one figure that made me think about that.
Yeah.
It was saying that one watch is running in 1 year as much as a car running in 10 years without any stop. And then you realize that it's an engine inside.
Yeah. Yep.
And so then some stuff happened, and then you want to have it properly fixed as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there just can't be any reasonable expectation that a watch is going to be able to run forever without maintenance.
Yeah.
And some people, I've heard some very, very high-level collectors of both new and vintage pieces say, "Oh, I'll just get it serviced when it malfunctions." That bothers me kind of from an aesthetic perspective with newer watches. I mean, that's like saying, I'll just drive my car until it breaks down. Of course, if your watch stops working, you don't have to, get out and walk, which you do with a car, which is probably why more people are more careful with their cars than their watches. But with a vintage watch, especially one with a movement where getting parts are going to be an issue, I just think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think like the answer to does cost matter is yes, definitely, and you have to account that. The one thing that bothers me more is the timeline associated to that. When on some brands you're talking months, if not years.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that all
It's
the
not
brands,
just money; it's also time.
And like thinking, okay, I just got this vintage watch, and then suddenly it stops working,
Right.
and I have to wait like 2 years to get it back. I've lived that situation actually, and that's the issue to me.
It's like the old joke about the guy who finds a slip for a watch that his grandfather left for repair 50 years ago, and he goes to the watchmaker, and he hands the slip to the watchmaker. The watchmaker looks at it, and it's 50 years ago the watch was dropped off, and the watchmaker goes, "Oh, it'll be ready next week."
Yeah. Well, this is something I guess brands are trying to improve on, but it's true that you have to account that it's going to take some time. It's going to cost a bit, and it's going to take some time, and it's just maybe a good reason to have several watches. I don't know.
Yeah. There you go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Louis. That was really, really great auction picks. I love the globe, and I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us as well. We'll see you all next week, and until then, take care and thanks for the questions.